Part 11700 word story here. A quiet woman named Lina arrived at the community center on a cool evening just before sunset. The building stood at the edge of a small park, and the sound of children playing outside drifted through the open doors. She stepped inside slowly, holding a folder of blank music sheets. She didn't dress to stand out. Her clothes were simple, comfortable, and well-worn, as if she preferred to blend into the background rather than draw attention. Even the way she walked suggested she wanted to cause no disturbance to anyone around her. Lina had signed up for the adult piano class a week earlier. She didn't tell anyone, not even her close friends, that she had finally decided to return to music. For a long time, she had quietly stayed away from the piano, almost as if the instrument had become a reminder of something too large to face. Now, she hoped the class would let her ease her way back into it, without pressure, without expectations, and without anyone knowing her past. When she first entered the classroom, a few students were already there, sitting at the keyboards arranged in a half circle. Most of them chatted casually while waiting for the lesson to begin. They looked like people who took the class simply to add something joyful to their evenings. Some were retirees. Some seemed to be professionals who came straight from work. A few looked nervous, new to the idea of learning an instrument at all. Lina gave a polite smile to the group before quietly choosing a seat in the far corner. The instructors, two friendly teachers who worked together, noticed her and walked over to greet her. They welcomed her warmly, but didn't sense anything unusual about her. To them, she appeared like any new student, soft-spoken, uncertain, maybe a bit shy. "Is this your first time learning piano?" one teacher asked. Lina shook her head gently. "I played a little before," she answered in a modest voice. A little was not exactly the truth, but she didn't feel ready to say more, and the teachers didn't push further. They simply nodded and assumed she meant she had taken a few lessons sometime in the past. As the class settled in, Lina sat quietly, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys of the electronic keyboard. She didn't play anything. She only tapped a few notes softly, as though testing the feel of the instrument. She didn't want to draw attention by playing anything more than simple warm-up touches. The instructors began by reviewing basic scales and hand positions. Lina followed along, copying the motions calmly. She didn't need the instructions. They were the sort of things she had practiced thousands of times in her younger years, but she didn't rush or show any signs of impatience. She wanted to blend in. She wanted her return to music to feel gentle. As the lesson went on, the teachers invited different students to play short exercises. Some hesitated, some stumbled through the notes, some laughed nervously after making mistakes. The instructors were encouraging and kind to everyone. When it was Lina's turn, they asked her to play a simple pattern. Lina sat a little straighter. She placed her hands on the keys and played the pattern softly, holding back more than she normally would. She kept her touch light and slow, careful not to let her natural precision or speed show. She didn't want anyone to notice anything unusual. She only wanted to be another student in the room. The teachers nodded approvingly. "Great job," one said. "You'll pick this up quickly." Lina simply smiled and lowered her hands. As the class continued, the teachers explained that they would be moving into more advanced pieces later in the course. Many students seemed nervous, but Lina only listened quietly. She wondered what pieces they meant. She wondered, too, how she would handle it when the time came. She didn't want to be in a position where she had to reveal anything about her past. More than anything, she wanted to enjoy the music again, without feeling judged or compared. During a short break, a couple of classmates approached her. They struck up friendly conversation, asking where she was from and what made her join the class. She answered politely, without giving away much. She said she always loved music and wanted to try learning again. She said she hoped she could keep up with the lessons. She didn't mention the years she had spent practicing for hours every day. She didn't mention the competitions she once entered. She didn't mention the quiet, heavy decision to leave all of it behind. When the break ended and everyone returned to their seats, Lena felt a mix of calmness and unease. She enjoyed being in a room full of people who shared a love for music. But she also felt the familiar feeling she had tried to leave behind, the fear of standing out. She had once lived in a world where standing out was expected, required even. She had been praised, pushed, guided, judged. All of it had left a mark deep inside her. Now, she wanted something different. She wanted music without pressure. She wanted to play for herself. As the class moved on to slightly harder exercises, the teachers noticed Lena staying quiet and choosing the easiest versions of each assignment. They didn't see her as someone with experience. To them, she seemed hesitant, maybe nervous about trying anything too challenging. They offered her gentle encouragement, telling her she could go at her own pace, reminding her that mistakes were normal. Lena appreciated their kindness. She followed along with the exercises, always careful not to let her natural skills slip out. She played softly, slowly, simply. But despite her efforts to stay unnoticed, small things gave hints of her true ability. A classmate once heard her adjust her posture with the ease of someone who practiced long ago. Another noticed that she never struggled with rhythm. One of the teachers even paused once, as if sensing something slightly unusual about the way her fingers moved. Still, they all dismissed the thought. After all, Lena never played more than a few notes at a time. She avoided any opportunity that would require her to perform something challenging. She politely passed when volunteers were asked to play a short melody. She quietly flipped through music sheets without commenting. She nodded along as if she needed explanations she actually understood deeply. By the end of the first class session, Lena felt relieved. She made it through the evening without revealing anything she didn't want to. She packed her things slowly, giving the teachers and students polite goodbyes as she left the room. Walking through the now quiet hallway, she felt a strange mixture of peace and vulnerability. The class reminded her of the joy she used to feel when she first learned the piano as a child. Back then, the keys felt like a friend, not a responsibility. She wished she could return fully to that feeling. Outside the community center, she paused for a moment before heading home. The sky had darkened, and the air felt cool against her skin. She closed her eyes and tried to take comfort in the simplicity of the evening. She didn't want to think about what might happen later in the class when things got more difficult. She didn't want to imagine a situation where the teachers expected something from her she wasn't ready to share. But even as she stood there quietly, she knew deep down that her presence in the class would eventually lead to questions. Sooner or later, someone would hear the truth in the way she played. Maybe it would happen during a warm-up. Maybe during a group practice. Maybe by accident. For now, though, she allowed herself to believe she could stay hidden a little longer. She walked home slowly, each step matching the quiet rhythm of her thoughts. She hoped the next class would be as simple as this one. She hoped she could continue to blend in, but deep inside, she knew the piano had always had a way of revealing the truth, no matter how carefully a person tried to hide it. Part 21700 word story here. The following week arrived faster than Lena expected. She found herself standing outside the community center again, holding the same simple folder pressed close to her chest. The sky was cloudy this time, and the air had that soft chill that made people move a little quicker. Lena stood still for a moment before walking inside, trying to gather the calmness she hoped would last her through the class. When she entered the music room, a few students were already warming up. The familiar tapping of keys filled the space in short bursts, some notes landing right, some not quite. The small sounds made the room feel alive. Lena chose the same seat from before, hoping routine would make her feel at ease. The instructors walked around greeting the students as they prepared for the evening lesson. They smiled when they reached Lena. She returned the smile politely, hoping her nerves didn't show. Even though she was comfortable being here, a part of her still feared the moment someone might accidentally glimpse who she used to be. The class began with simple warm-up scales. The teachers encouraged everyone to practice slowly and gently. They reminded the students that muscle memory develops over time and that no one should rush. Lena followed along, keeping her touch soft. She could play the scales in her sleep. She could play them blindfolded. But she made every movement look careful and modest. As the first warm-up ended, one of the teachers said, "Tonight we're going to add something a little more challenging." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the class. Some students exchanged worried looks. Lena kept her eyes low. The teachers handed out new music sheets. Lena accepted hers quietly and scanned it with a sinking feeling. It was still simple, well below the level she was used to, but more complex than last week. Enough to make her cautious. "Don't worry," one teacher said, noticing the uncertain expressions across the room. "We'll go through it together." They demonstrated the piece slowly, playing each measure while explaining how to count the rhythm. The class listened carefully. A few students nodded with determination, ready to try. Lena studied her copy of the sheet. Her mind automatically broke it down the way she had been trained. Phrasing, balance, timing. But she pushed those instincts away. She didn't want to think like her old self, not here. When it came time for students to try playing, the teachers walked around, offering tips and adjusting hand positions. Some struggled with hitting the right notes. Others had trouble keeping both hands steady. A few laughed at themselves when they made mistakes. Lena sat quietly, waiting until most students had practiced. She didn't want to start too early. She didn't want her ease to stand out. But one of the teachers noticed she wasn't playing yet. "How's it going back there?" the teacher asked with a warm smile. Lena returned the smile gently. "I'm just getting used to it," she said in a calm voice. The teacher nodded and moved on, satisfied with the answer. Finally, Lena placed her fingers on the keys and played the first line of the piece, barely pressing down, so the notes came out soft. She intentionally played slower than the written tempo, pausing slightly between measures, as if she needed a moment to think. A classmate seated beside her offered a friendly whisper. "You're doing fine." "I'm still messing up every few lines." Lena smiled politely. "It just takes practice." The classmate nodded eagerly, glad for the reassurance. As the lesson continued, one of the instructors asked for volunteers to try playing the piece from start to finish. A few students volunteered, though each one made nervous comments before beginning. The teachers praised them warmly for trying. When Lena kept her eyes down, the instructors assumed she was shy or hesitant. They didn't push her, thinking it was better to give her time. From their point of view, she was simply one of the quieter students, one who might need a bit more encouragement later. During a brief pause in the lesson, the teachers began talking among themselves about upcoming sessions. They mentioned that the group would eventually work on a classical piece that was known to be tricky for beginners. Many students overheard and groaned playfully. Lena listened quietly, her heart sinking a little. She knew exactly what kind of piece they were talking about, the type she could play effortlessly, even after years away. But it was the kind of piece that revealed ability instantly. She hoped the teachers would choose something less revealing, something less familiar. As the class resumed, a small group of students gathered around one of the teachers for extra help. Lena stayed in her seat, looking over the music sheet again. She tried to stay relaxed. But the longer she sat there, the more she felt the old tug in her chest, the tug that came from holding herself back. Her hands wanted to move freely. Her fingers wanted to play the way they were trained. But she didn't allow them. She reminded herself why she came here. She wanted a gentle return to music. She wanted to feel like a beginner again. She wanted to erase the weight of the past. Still, something inside her felt restless. She suddenly realized how much she missed playing the way she once did, not for praise, not for competition, but simply because her soul wanted it. She took a breath, then quietly pressed down a few notes from memory, just a small phrase from a piece she used to love. The notes were soft but unusually smooth. To her surprise, a classmate across the room looked up. The classmate had sharp hearing and recognized that what Lina just played wasn't from the assigned piece. That sounded really nice, the classmate said, smiling. Lina froze for a second. She quickly shook her head. Oh, I was just testing the keys. The classmate believed her easily and went back to their own practice. But that moment made Lina even more cautious. A little later, one of the teachers walked around again, checking in on everyone. When the teacher reached Lina, they watched her play one measure. Even though she was holding back, her touch was different, lighter, more controlled, more precise. The teacher tilted their head slightly. How long did you say you played before? They asked casually. Lina's heart tightened. Just a little, she replied with a small smile. The teacher didn't press further, but something about her answer didn't fully settle in their mind. Still, the teacher kept the thought to themselves and moved on. As the class neared the end of the hour, the teachers announced that the last 10 minutes would be for group practice. They wanted everyone to try playing the new piece together. The room filled with uneven rhythms and mixed tempos. Some students got lost halfway. Others tried to keep up. The sound was messy, but full of effort. Lina joined in softly, blending her notes into the scattered sound around her. She played just loud enough to be part of the group, but still careful not to let her true rhythm show. When the piece ended, one teacher clapped lightly. Great effort, everyone. It's not an easy piece, but you're all improving. The class looked proud of themselves. As everyone began packing up, a few students lingered, chatting about the lesson. Some talked about how they struggled with the left-hand pattern. Others joked that they needed hours of practice at home. One student approached Lina again, smiling warmly. You always seem calm when you play. I wish I had that. Lina shook her head modestly. I get nervous too, the student laughed. Really? You don't look like it. Lina didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled. As she put her sheet music away, she overheard the teachers talking near the front of the room. They spoke softly, but Lina caught parts of their conversation. The new piece next week might be too advanced, maybe good for growth. She felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She knew what growth usually meant in music instruction. It meant pushing boundaries. It meant challenging the students. It meant choosing a piece that demanded more. She also knew it would mean more attention on her if she didn't keep hiding carefully. When she left the classroom, she walked down the hall with slow, thoughtful steps. The building felt quieter than before. The echoes of the earlier notes seemed to float behind her as she moved. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the walkway, scraping lightly against the ground. Lina pulled her jacket tighter around herself and started home. Her mind drifted to the upcoming lesson. She wondered how long she could keep her secret. She wondered whether she would eventually slip without meaning to, or whether someone would simply catch a detail she couldn't hide. But more than anything, she wondered whether she was ready, truly ready, to let music back into her life in the way she once knew. For now, she promised herself she would try to stay invisible a little longer. She walked home with that thought, unaware of how quickly everything would change in the weeks to come. Part 3170 O-Word Story here. The next class arrived with a quiet sense of tension for Lina, even though nothing unusual had happened yet. She felt at the moment she stepped into the community center. Maybe it was the way her heart beat a little faster, or the way her fingers twitched slightly wanting to play something familiar. She didn't know why she felt so alert, but she sensed that this evening would bring something different. Inside the classroom, the students were buzzing with small conversations. Some compared notes from the previous week. Others joked about how many mistakes they had made while practicing at home. A few simply sat quietly at their keyboards, tapping random notes as they waited for the lesson to begin. Lina slipped into the room without drawing attention. She placed her folder on the stand, took her usual seat, and kept her gaze low. She liked being here, but she also feared being seen too closely. The instructors arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of new sheet music. They greeted everyone warmly and seemed excited about the lesson. When they gathered the class together, one of them smiled in a way that told everyone something new was coming. "Tonight," the teacher said, "we're going to try something a little more advanced. Don't panic, this is just to help everyone grow." There it was, that word again. Grow. Lina felt her stomach tighten. She had tried so hard in the past weeks to keep things simple, to hide behind easy exercises and quiet playing. But she knew the day would come when the class would be pushed further. The teachers walked around handing out the new sheets. When Lina received hers, she stared at the notes printed on the page. She recognized the piece immediately. It was a shortened version of a famous classical composition, simple enough for intermediate students, but still known for being tricky. Her heart sank a little. This wasn't something she could hide behind easily. Even a slower beginner version would expose the difference between natural hesitation and real experience. The class murmured with nervous laughter. A few students whispered things like, "Are they serious?" and "This looks impossible." Lina remained quiet. One instructor clapped lightly to get everyone's attention. "Listen, no one has to play this perfectly. The point tonight is to understand the structure. We'll break it down piece by piece." The teachers then demonstrated the first few measures, playing slowly while explaining the pattern. The class listened with wide eyes. Some students leaned closer to their sheets, as if that would make the notes less intimidating. When it was time for everyone to try, the room filled with scattered sounds. Notes overlapped, rhythms fell apart, and some students laughed at their own clumsy attempts. Lina sat still for a moment. She could see the entire composition in her mind. She knew how it should sound, how each phrase connected, where the emotion sat, where the strength belonged. But she pushed all those thoughts away. She had to blend in. She lifted her hands and began playing the first line, pressing the keys softly, letting her fingers move with intentional slowness. She paused where a real beginner might pause. She let her timing slip in one or two spots, nothing obvious, just enough to seem unsure that one student sitting beside her whispered, "You're doing better than I am." Lina shook her head modestly. "I'm just trying to figure it out." The class continued practicing in small sections. The teachers walked around, listening and guiding. When one instructor reached Lina, they watched her hands for a moment. Something about the way she adjusted her fingers caught their eye. "You have a natural touch," the teacher said gently. Lina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just practiced a little at home," she replied softly. The teacher nodded, but looked like they wanted to ask more. Instead, they moved on to help another student who was completely lost in the left-hand pattern dot as the lesson continued. The instructors decided it was time to let each student try a short part individually. They didn't ask for volunteers. They simply went around the room. Lina's heart beat faster as they got closer to her. She didn't want to stand out. She didn't want to be placed under any spotlight. A few students before her stumbled their way through the measures. The teachers offered kind encouragement each time. Then it was Lina's turn. "Ready?" One teacher asked with an encouraging smile. She nodded. Though her hands felt cold. She took a breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She started slowly, careful not to let the smoothness of her training show. But familiarity made her timing too natural. too steady. She tried to break the rhythm a little, but even then, her touch stayed softer and more controlled than the average beginner's. When she finished her short section, the teacher nodded. "Good. Keep practicing that. You'll get it." Lena gave a small smile and lowered her hands. But as she looked up, she noticed something she hadn't expected. A few classmates were watching her in quiet curiosity, not judgment, just interest. Maybe they had noticed something. Maybe they saw how she played with more ease than they did. Maybe they wondered why. She quickly looked back down at her sheet. The class moved on to the next section, and the teachers introduced the most challenging part of the piece. The room groaned again in unison. The teachers laughed kindly. "We promise it's not as bad as it looks." But when they demonstrated it, many students winced. The notes were fast, the combination of hands was tricky, and the rhythm required a bit of confidence. Lena watched quietly. Her fingers twitched again, an old instinct. Her hands remembered this pattern. She had played it years ago, not this simplified version, but the original. She forced her hands to stay still. When the teachers asked everyone to try, chaos filled the room again. Notes clashed. Rhythms collapsed. Someone sighed loudly in frustration. Someone else laughed after hitting the wrong key 5 times in a row. Lena knew she had to be careful. If she mirrored the same struggle, it would look forced. But if she played naturally, she would reveal everything. She waited until the room felt loud enough that no one would hear her clearly. Then she practiced quietly, pressing just loud enough for herself, but not others. She slowed her pace, hesitating at every turn. Even then, the familiar movements felt like a secret burning inside her. Near the end of the lesson, one of the teachers spoke again. "Before we leave today, we'd like a few students to try the first section together. Just a small group. It helps everyone get used to playing in front of others." Several students groaned or hid behind their music sheets playfully. Lena felt her shoulders tense. The teacher picked 3 students at random. Her name was called. Her heart dropped. She took another breath and walked slowly to the front with 2 other students. They looked terrified, whispering about how they'd probably mess up in the first measure. Lena wished she could trade places with someone else. She didn't want to be here, standing where everyone could hear her. The teacher counted them in. The other 2 students played with shaky confidence. One got lost halfway, but kept going. The other pressed a wrong key and laughed nervously. Lena played softly again, almost too softly, but her timing was still cleaner than she meant for it to be. She even hesitated mid-section to avoid sounding too smooth. When they finished, the class clapped politely. The teacher gave feedback to each of them. When they reached Lena, they said, "Good control. Keep pushing yourself a little more. I think you can handle more than you think." Lena didn't know how to reply. She just smiled and returned to her seat. As the class wrapped up, a feeling of unease followed her. She packed her things slowly, hoping her quiet presence would help others forget the moment. But as she walked toward the door, one student called to her softly, "You're better than you let on, aren't you?" Lena froze. She turned slowly to face the student, who wasn't accusing her, just curious. "I just practiced a little," Lena said gently. The student smiled. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working." Lena nodded and left the room before anyone else approached. When she stepped outside, she inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air settle her thoughts. She walked down the quiet street, the sound of distant cars humming softly. Inside her chest, a conflict grew stronger. She had joined the class hoping to stay small, unnoticed, just another person learning slowly. But each week made it harder. Music lived in her hands, no matter how much she tried to hide it. As she walked, she wondered if the teachers would eventually ask her to try something much harder. She wondered if her classmates would start paying closer attention. She wondered how long she could keep pretending she didn't know the answer. But one thing felt certain. The more she tried to hide her past, the more it pushed its way to the surface. And she didn't realize yet that the real test was coming much sooner than she expected. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the world wanted to give her a gentle start after the long night she had lived through. She woke before the sun was fully out, sitting up slowly and letting the calm settle in her chest. The house was still and peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of hesitation pressing on her shoulders. Instead, there was a soft warmth, almost like a small spark beginning to glow. She went to the kitchen, made herself a warm cup of tea, and stood by the window while sipping it. The sky outside carried a pale gold color, the kind that appears only for a few minutes before becoming brighter. She watched it quietly, thinking about everything that had happened at the school, how she had first been unsure, then nervous, then steady, and finally brave enough to let her hands move the way they always had. She hadn't planned to reveal anything about her past, yet life had its own way of pushing her forward. As she stood there, memories started returning, but this time they didn't hurt. Instead, they felt like old friends gently tapping on a door. She remembered the long afternoons when she used to play alone, the hours she spent perfecting each movement, the competitions she once joined, and the joy she once felt when her music filled rooms of people who listened in silent wonder. She hadn't let herself think of those days for a long time, but now they didn't feel painful. They felt familiar. She finished her tea, placed the cup down, and decided to step outside. She needed a walk, something to clear her mind and let her thoughts adjust to this new direction her life seemed to be moving toward. The morning air was cool and refreshing. She walked down the street slowly, taking in the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Birds were chirping along the rooftops, and a few people were starting their routines. Everything felt simple and normal, but inside her there was a slight flutter. Not fear, more like anticipation. She didn't know what the teachers would say when she returned to the school. She didn't know how the students would react. She wasn't even sure if the staff wanted her to play again, or if the whole evening had been a once-in-a-lifetime moment. But one thing was clear. Something had changed. It wasn't just the teacher's surprise or the students' expressions. It was the way she had felt the moment her fingers first touched the keys on that grand piano. She had felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her walk led her to a small park she rarely visited. It wasn't large, but it had tall trees that swayed whenever the wind passed through. She sat on a bench under one of them, letting the leaves cast soft shadows on her face. People walked by occasionally, some with dogs, some alone, some in pairs, each absorbed in their own world. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in the gentle quiet around her, she could almost hear faint piano notes. Not loud, not clear, just the memory of sound. She smiled softly. After a while, she stood up and made her way back home. She had things to do, and she didn't want to spend the whole morning drifting in thoughts. But the walk helped. It steadied her. It made her feel ready not for something grand, but simply for whatever might come next. As she reached home, she noticed her phone had several messages. She rarely received many at once, but today was different. She picked it up and saw that most of them were from the school. Not just from the teachers, but also from a few parents she knew. She opened the messages slowly, unsure of what to expect. The first message read, "We just want to say thank you again for sharing your talent. Everyone was talking about it this morning." Another message said, "Your performance last night inspired many of us." Some of the students haven't stopped talking about it. Others expressed appreciation, amazement, and even curiosity. She sat down at the table, reading each message with careful attention. With every line, her heart softened a little more. She didn't feel overwhelmed. Instead, she felt strangely grounded, almost like the world was gently guiding her back toward a part of herself she thought was gone. Then another message arrived, this one from one of the senior teachers. We would love for you to share your knowledge with the students, only if you feel comfortable. Maybe you could guide a few of them? They look up to you now. Please think about it. She stared at the message for a long moment, her breath caught midway. Teach? Guide? She had never imagined such a thing. She had not touched that world for years, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to step into it again. But the idea lingered. It didn't frighten her, but it didn't feel easy either. It simply sat there. Waiting. She placed the phone aside and stood near the window again, looking out at the road. Cars passed by. Children walked to school with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, and the everyday rhythm of life continued. Yet her thoughts wandered. She imagined what it would feel like to help young students discover the beauty of music, to see their expressions when they learned a new tune, to guide their hands, their posture, their confidence. She imagined sharing the knowledge she had kept buried inside. The idea tugged gently at her heart, but she also remembered the reasons she had stepped away from the music world years ago. The pressure, the expectations, the endless competitions. She had loved music, but she had not loved everything attached to it. She didn't want to relive that weight again. She took a slow breath, steadying her thoughts. She didn't need to decide immediately. She could take her time. The rest of the day passed with quiet tasks. She cleaned the living room, watered the plants, prepared lunch, and tried to keep herself busy. But no matter what she did, her mind kept drifting back to the messages, especially the one asking if she would consider helping the students by late afternoon. She felt restless again. Not anxious, just unable to ignore the lingering thoughts. So she picked up her bag and decided to go to the school. Not for any big decision, but simply to see the place during a normal afternoon. Maybe being there would bring clarity. The school grounds were calmer than usual when she arrived. Classes were still going on, and only a few students were outside. She walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights, the courtyard, the long hallways, the mural near the entrance she had always admired. As she approached the music room, she heard faint sound, soft piano notes, uneven and hesitant. Someone was practicing. She stopped just outside the door and listened. The notes were shaky, like someone learning a new piece for the first time. There were pauses, small mistakes, and little sighs of frustration. But underneath all that, she heard something else. Effort. She pushed the door open slightly and peeked inside. A young student sat at the piano, pressing keys slowly and trying to follow a sheet of music placed on the stand. The student didn't notice her at first and kept trying, fingers stiff but determined. She watched quietly for a moment, observing the struggle and the persistence. Then the student hit a wrong note again and let out a small groan. Why is this so hard? The young one muttered, lowering their head. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she stepped inside. The student turned quickly, startled. Oh, I didn't see you. I'm sorry, I'm just practicing. Don't mind me. The young voice carried embarrassment. She approached slowly and smiled gently. You're trying, she said. That's the most important part. The student nodded shyly, but looked uncertain. I want to play it right, but I keep messing up. She stood beside the piano and looked at the sheet. It was a simple piece, one meant for beginners. She placed her hand lightly on the edge of the piano, not touching the keys yet. May I show you something? She asked. The student's eyes widened. You play? The young one asked, clearly unaware of the previous night's events. She gave a small, simple nod. She moved her fingers onto the keys and played the section slowly, breaking it into small parts. Her movements were gentle, steady, and easy to follow. The student watched with full attention, eyes wide, absorbing every detail. When she finished the short part, she looked at the student again. Try it like this slow, one step at a time. Don't rush. The student nodded eagerly and placed their fingers on the keys. This time, the notes flowed a little better. Still not perfect, but smoother. She watched carefully and offered small pointers when needed. For a few minutes, the room felt warm not in temperature, but in spirit. It reminded her of old days, when she used to practice with guidance from someone patient. Those memories returned, but instead of hurting, they wrapped around her with softness. "That's much better," she said when the student finished. "Keep practicing like that, and you'll see improvement every day." The student smiled brightly, the uncertainty fading. "Thank you. I didn't know you could play so well." She looked down modestly. "It's something I used to do a lot." At that moment, the door opened and one of the teachers stepped in. The teacher paused, surprised to see her standing there beside the piano. "Oh, you came," the teacher said kindly. "We didn't expect to see you today." She nodded. "I just wanted to stop by." The teacher noticed the student practicing with her help. A warm smile formed on the teacher's face. "It seems you already made someone's day." She glanced at the student, who was now practicing again with renewed confidence. As she watched those earnest hands move, something stirred inside her. Perhaps sharing music didn't have to come with heavy expectations. Perhaps it could be simple, just guiding young hearts, gently and quietly. The teacher then said softly, "If you ever feel R." The day after she visited the school, she woke up earlier than usual. There was something different in the air, a quiet energy she couldn't ignore. She didn't know if it came from the messages, the students she had helped, or the growing thought inside her that maybe, just maybe, she could step back into music in her own gentle way. But whatever it was, it made her move with a little more purpose. She made breakfast slowly, tasting every bite without rushing. Then she cleaned the small kitchen, opened the windows for fresh air, and let sunlight pour into the rooms. It was a simple start to the morning, but she felt calm. She liked this feeling steady, peaceful, not overwhelmed by anything. After finishing the small chores, she sat on the couch with her hands resting on her knees. Her mind drifted to the school again, to the sound of the hesitant piano notes she heard the day before, and to the hopeful face of the young student trying so hard to learn. She remembered the way the student's fingers had relaxed, just a little when she guided them. The memory warmed her. She told herself she wasn't making any decisions yet. She wasn't stepping into anything big. She was just thinking, just allowing the idea to float in her mind. Still, a gentle tug pulled at her dot. She glanced toward the corner of the living room. There, covered with a cloth, was her old keyboard, the one she hadn't touched for years. The cloth was clean, dusted occasionally, but she had never lifted it. She had always kept it there quietly. Like a closed door she wasn't ready to open today felt different. She stood up slowly and walked toward it. For a moment she just stared at it, her breath soft and steady. Then she reached for the cloth and lifted it gently. The keyboard sat beneath it, familiar in shape, simple in design, but full of memories that once carried her through countless hours of practice. She didn't rush to sit down. She just looked at it, really looked at it, letting the sight sink in. After a long pause, she finally sat on the small bench beside it. She placed her hands in her lap and took a long breath. She wasn't sure if she wanted to play. She only wanted to see if her hands would move naturally. Slowly, she lifted them and placed her fingers on the keys. She pressed one note. The sound was soft, a little weaker than a grand piano, but still clear enough to echo lightly in the room. It wasn't the deep, rich sound she had heard at the school, yet it carried a gentle familiarity that touched her heart. She pressed another note, then another. Her fingers moved more freely now. almost as if they remembered what to do without being told. She didn't play a full piece. She didn't play anything structured. She simply moved through notes, letting her hands wander. Soon, a small melody formed, simple, slow, almost like a whisper. It wasn't perfect. She wasn't trying to make it perfect. It was just her hands following her thought's dot, and for the first time in a long while, she felt comfort. When she finished, she let her hands rest again. She didn't feel overwhelmed or emotional. Instead, she felt grounded, almost like she was rediscovering a part of herself she had forgotten existed. She stood up after a few minutes and covered the keyboard again, but this time, the action didn't feel like closing a door. It felt like placing a bookmark inside a chapter. She planned to return to Dot later that day. She prepared lunch and spent time doing chores around the house. She tried reading a book, but her focus kept drifting. The sounds of the piano from the day before lingered in her mind. She found herself humming the simple melody she had played earlier. By mid-afternoon, she received another message from the same teacher who had spoken to her in the music room. The message was warm and thoughtful, not pushy in any way. "We're planning something small for next week. A music activity day for the younger students. It's nothing serious, just something fun to lift their spirits. If you feel comfortable, you could stop by and simply observe. No teaching unless you want to. No pressure." She read the message twice. Observe. No pressure. Something small. She appreciated the careful tone. The teachers weren't trying to rush her. They weren't trying to label her or put her in a position she didn't want. They were giving her time and space. She sat at the table holding the phone, thinking about the quiet room she walked into the day before. The student who had looked up with such hope, the sound of uneven notes that slowly grew smoother. Would it hurt to just observe? Would it be overwhelming? She wasn't sure, but the idea didn't frighten her. For a long moment, she stared at the message, her fingers hovering above the screen. Then she typed a simple reply, "I can come by, just to observe." She read the sentence again, ensuring it reflected what she could handle. Then she sent it. A few minutes later, a reply came back. "We're glad. It means a lot to the students." She placed the phone down, feeling a small shift inside her knot. Drastic, not life-changing, but gentle and steady, like a small step forward. Later in the evening, she sat outside on her small porch, watching the sky darken and the streetlights flicker on one by one. A soft breeze brushed past her face. She hugged a light blanket around her shoulders as she sat quietly, listening to the calm of the evening. She thought about how far she had come in just a few days. From someone who tried to stay unnoticed to someone slowly allowing herself to reconnect with a world she had once left behind. She wasn't returning as who she was years ago. She wasn't chasing perfection, competition, or recognition. She was simply finding her way back to a part of herself, on her own terms. As she watched people passing by on the street, she realized something important. Music didn't need to be something grand to matter. It didn't need a stage, a spotlight, or an audience holding their breath. It could simply be a moment shared between two people. A small melody played on an old keyboard. A gentle touch guiding someone's hands. The next few days moved quietly, but not heavily. She felt lighter. She did her tasks at home, cooked meals, cleaned, and took walks just as she always did. But now, every day carried a small thread of anticipation. She found herself gently humming more often. Sometimes she lifted the cloth on her keyboard just to look at it. Twice she even sat down to play again, only for a few minutes, but enough to remind her that her hands still remembered. On the night before the music activity day at the school, she stood in front of her mirror and looked at herself. Not with judgment, not with worry, but with calm acceptance. She brushed her hair slowly, deciding how she wanted to present herself. She picked simple clothes, comfortable but neat. She didn't want attention. She only wanted to feel steady. She went to bed early, unsure of what the next day would bring, but at peace knowing she wasn't forcing herself into anything she didn't want. The morning arrived softly, with pale sunlight stretching across her room. She got ready quietly and walked to the school. As she approached the entrance, she heard faint chatter and laughter from inside. The atmosphere felt lively. She stepped through the main hallway, moving slowly. A few teachers greeted her gently, not overwhelming her with excitement. They simply offered warm smiles. "Thank you for coming," one of them whispered kindly. She nodded shyly but sincerely. The music room door was open, and she could hear students practicing simple rhythms and notes on different instruments. Not perfectly, not professionally, just joyfully. As she entered, several students noticed her and whispered among themselves. Not in a bothersome way, but in the way young people react when they hear stories about someone who surprised everyone. One teacher walked up to her quietly. "You can sit wherever you feel comfortable. We're just letting them explore sounds today." She chose a seat near the side of the room, where she could watch without feeling exposed. Students moved around, with small drums, tiny xylophones, and a few simple keyboards. Some hit notes at random, laughing and testing sounds. Others tried to copy melodies printed on small sheets. She observed patiently, watching their excitement and frustration blend together. A few minutes later, the student she had helped the other day spotted her and brightened immediately. The student hurried over. "You came," the young one said happily. She smiled softly. "I said I would." The student sat beside her for a moment, holding a piece of paper with music notes scribbled on it. "I practiced the part you showed me," the student said proudly. Her eyebrows lifted gently. "Did you? That's wonderful. Do you want to hear it?" the student asked, eyes hopeful. Something inside her warmed. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." They moved to one of the small keyboards. The student sat down and placed their fingers carefully on the keys. The first few notes came out shaky, but then the melody grew steadier, smoother. Not flawless, but full of effort and heart. She watched quietly, hands clasped in front of her. Every note felt like a small piece of courage from the young student. When the student finished, she nodded gently. "You've improved a lot." The student's smile spread wide, full of pride. "Thanks to you," the young one said. She shook her head softly. "You did the work. I only showed a small part." As the room filled with other students trying out their instruments, she suddenly realized something. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't overwhelmed. She didn't feel out of place. She felt present. And as she watched the students' excited movements, listened to their laughter, and saw their determination, she knew something quietly but fully. This was only the beginning of her return. Not the old return, a new one. One she could shape gently, freely, and without fear. She stayed in the room longer than she expected. The days that followed felt lighter than anything she had experienced in years. Not because everything was perfect or easy, but because she finally allowed herself to breathe in a way she hadn't in a long time. She moved through her routines with a new softness, as if the world had shifted just slightly, creating more space for her to exist without pressure. Every morning, she woke up before the sun rose, not out of habit, but because she genuinely enjoyed the calm. She made tea, opened her windows, and let the early light spill into her home. Sometimes she hummed soft melodies without realizing it. Sometimes she sat at her old keyboard and played for a few quiet minutes. Nothing intense, nothing demanding, just gentle movements of the fingers, soft enough to keep her connected to the part of herself she had slowly been rediscovering. The school had thanked her more times than she could count for attending the music day. The teachers sent her kind messages, thanking her for bringing a warm presence into the room, for helping the students, for showing patience and care without being asked. But she didn't let the words overwhelm her. She took them in slowly, allowing herself to feel appreciated without letting it turn into pressure. And the young students she had helped kept practicing. Every few days, she received short updates, a quick recording, a photo of scribbled notes, or a simple message that said, "I practiced today." Each time she saw those messages, she felt something gentle stir inside her, a small kind of joy. One late afternoon, she returned to the school again, not for any event, but because the same teacher invited her to stop by whenever she felt comfortable. The invitation had come with no expectations, no roles to fill, just a door left open. She walked into the school quietly, moving through the familiar halls at her own pace. As she approached the music room, she heard soft notes coming from inside. It wasn't the hesitant sound from before. It was steadier, more confident. The young student was practicing again. She stood by the doorway, watching for a moment. The student didn't notice her at first, so focused on playing correctly that the outside world didn't exist. Their fingers moved slowly but surely across the keys, each note a little clearer than the last. She stepped inside, gently dot, when the student finally looked up and saw her. Their entire face brightened. "You came back." She nodded. "I wanted to see how you were doing." The student scooted aside on the bench, leaving space. "Do you want to sit?" She hesitated only a second before taking a seat beside the young one. It felt natural now, no longer heavy or strange. The student played again, and she watched quietly, offering gentle guidance only when needed. A slight adjustment here, a slower pace there, a softer touch on the keys. The student absorbed everything eagerly as they practiced together. Other students peeked in curiously. Some entered the room, each carrying small instruments or sheets of music. They gathered around, forming a small circle of quiet excitement. One of them said, "Can you show us something too? Just something small?" For a moment, she felt a flicker of her old hesitance. Not fear, just the memory of stepping into a spotlight she never wanted. But as she looked at the small faces watching her with curiosity, not expectation, she felt something incredibly simple. These children weren't asking for perfection. They were asking for connection. She placed her hands on the keys and played a short, gentle tune, something soft and peaceful, something the students could enjoy without feeling pressured to understand. The melody floated gently in the room, wrapping everyone in calm. The students listened with wide eyes. When she finished, one whispered, "It sounds like a story." Another said, "I want to learn that someday." She felt her chest warm. A teacher entered the room a few minutes later, surprised to find her surrounded by students, not overwhelmed, but completely at ease. The teacher gave her a gentle smile. "They liked being around you," the teacher said softly. She didn't respond right away. She simply watched the students, who were now testing their own instruments with renewed excitement. The teacher stepped closer and spoke quietly. "You don't have to decide now. But if you ever feel ready, we would love for you to guide some of them, even just once a week, or even once a month. Only what you're comfortable with." She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." And she meant it, not as an obligation, not as a duty, but as a possibility. After spending some time with the students, she walked home in the cool evening air, her steps steady and light. She replayed the moments in her mind, the music, the students' smiles, the quiet happiness she had felt. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was gentle, like a soft melody she couldn't forget. Over the next week, she found herself visiting the school more often. Not every day, but enough to feel connected. She spent time helping small groups of students. Sometimes she guided their hands on the keyboard. Sometimes she simply watched and offered encouragement. The teachers were respectful, giving her space and never asking for more than she could offer. And slowly, without realizing it, she became part of their routine. One day, the school planned a small end-of-month gathering for parents and students. Nothing formal, just an afternoon, meant to celebrate the effort the students had put into learning and practicing. The teachers didn't even call it a performance. They simply wanted families to see what their children had learned. The teacher approached her gently a few days before the event. It would mean a lot if you could be there. You don't need to play. You don't need to speak. Just being present would inspire the students. She agreed. On the day of the gathering, the music room was filled with soft chatter and warm smiles. Parents took seats along the walls, and the students prepared their little instruments with excitement and nerves. She sat quietly near the back, not wanting to draw attention. But one by one, students turned to look at her, their eyes sparkling with recognition and comfort. Some waved, some smiled shyly, and she felt something deep and real settle inside her. A longing, not the overwhelming kind that came with expectations. A soft, real kind. A human kind. The young student she had first helped went up to the small keyboard to play. Their hands trembled slightly, but when they looked at her, she gave a gentle nod. That was all they needed. The student played beautifully. Not perfect, but honest, full of feeling, full of heart. Every note carried effort and courage. When the student finished, the room erupted in soft applause. The student looked straight at her, smiling with pride. After the gathering ended, parents approached her to thank her. Not with overwhelming energy, but with warm sincerity. My child practices every day now. You gave them confidence. Thank you for inspiring them. She listened quietly, replying with simple kindness, never exaggerating her own role. Late in the evening, after everyone left, she sat alone in the music room for just a moment. The school was quiet. The instruments were put away. The room carried the soft echo of the day. She walked to the piano at the front of the room and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't need to play, but she wanted to. She closed her eyes and let her hands move. The melody that came was gentle, calm, full of peace. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a show. It was her heart speaking. The teacher quietly stepped into the room without interrupting. When she finished, the teacher said softly, "You've helped more than you know, and you've healed more than you realize." She turned slightly, surprised by the words. The teacher continued, "Music left you for a while because you needed space. But you didn't lose it. You only set it down. Now, you're picking it back up in your own way." She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight, not from sadness, but from overwhelming understanding. The teacher smiled gently. "Whenever you're ready, if you ever want to, there's a place here for you. Not as who you used to be, but as who you are now." She nodded slowly. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She stood up and looked around the room one more time. She thought about the children, the music, the quiet moments, and the small steps she had taken to reach this point. She had spent so long hiding from a part of herself, thinking it was something she had left behind forever. But now she understood something she had never realized before. Music wasn't tied to the past. It was tied to her, and she was still here. As she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she felt peaceful. A kind of peace that didn't need words or explanation. A peace that told her she was exactly where she needed to be. Her life didn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It didn't need a stage or applause. It only needed heart. And she had found hers again, not through perfection, not through competition, not through recognition, but through connection, kindness, and slow, gentle rediscovery. This was her new beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next.